All right, guys, well, let's go ahead and begin. This is our ninth awakening class, the master key to all problems. In this class, we're actually going to conclude a lot of stuff. It's kind of going to all start coming together. We've got a fun class planned, especially the new lesson part of it. And also, I always like to touch on the stuff we did on the previous week. So I'll kind of summarize what we did the previous week to get in our minds what that was and any experiences that we may have had this week with that lesson or the exercises. So primarily last week, which was lesson 8, lesson 8 was called Stability, Loving All the Shapes of Your Life. And that's an interesting name, Loving All the Shapes of Your Life. Right away, that makes no sense, but to the lesson, what we're talking about is the present moment itself is always shifting shapes. And the present moment is more than just like the physical objects of the present moment. It's also our inner experience too, which is emotion and also will include thought. And so this always shifting present moment shape, including all three of these levels of experience, physical, emotional, and mental, we were considering it to be a shape. And we were calling it a rock because of couple of the last lessons before this one, we were using the analogy of the rock. And so we were kind of continuing that analogy. And it's helpful in this because a rock provides stability. And what we're learning to do is to build a new relationship, a stabilizing relationship with whatever the shape of our present moment rock takes. And so that really was the challenge and practice of last week, is even aligning with that idea that, well, really it's building a new relationship. The challenge and practice last week was just building a new relationship with whatever was coming up instead of our normal tendency, which is to try to fix or change the shape of the present moment in order to make it better. Okay, so we all have certain shapes, if you will, of the present moment, meaning what the physical component looks like, what the emotional component feels like, what our thoughts may be, that we like better than others. And the only difficulty with that is that means that only like this much of the whole circle of life you like. And the rest of it is a difficulty or a challenge. And so what we're learning to do is just build a different relationship with every shape the present moment takes. And so I'm wondering if any of you had any experiences with maybe looking at emotions differently or looking at anything differently and being attentive to those things and noticing anything different arise. It's kind of like acceptance. I know Shara's had some experiences in her life that fall into that category you've described really well, Shara. Have you had any more experiences with maybe on a smaller level than what you've told us about throughout this week?
Nothing really this week.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Cool, yeah.
I always tend to go back. I get, that was such an event back years ago that I focus a lot back there. It seems I don't know why, but
Yeah. It taught you a
nothing.
lot. That was a heck of an experience back then. It taught you a lot. There's a lot to focus on. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot to digest or assimilate.
It did, but I feel like I'm more of who I was meant to be
Yeah.
after. I learned a lot from that experience. As bad as it seemed at the time, it really I grew a lot.
Totally. You know what my experience has been this week from the lesson is pretty much just that, what you were describing from that experience, which is uh, which is just really the accepting the exact conditions at hand. And so I'm even kind of like looking around and realizing, oh, okay, this is the way I feel right now. And really, feeling is one of the biggest key factors that we need to build a new relationship with. That's real. I could really summarize. You could really summarize the whole thing, and it'd just be like it's about building a new relationship with our feelings, because that is such like how we feel really determines on the attitudes that we and the thoughts that we move, the things that we say that we move into the world, and even the things we do to get rid of or to change the current feeling. And so that's what my experience has been this week, is looking at every feeling that arises as an opportunity to build a new relationship with it, meaning get used to it and start seeing the value in it. Because as we learned in previous lessons, every single feeling, everything is supportive, and even the propulsion that really it has a purpose for being there that really brings us to where we want to go. And so that's kind of been my experience this week, is just resting in not being so quick to try to get rid of. I mean, heck, even like things like coffee or whatever, that can be like the motivation behind us doing things like that can be to get rid of whatever we're feeling in the moment, instead of building a new relationship with it, so we can start to see its purpose and value too, and then really be more stable in our lives and not needing so many things to be a certain way in order to be happy or content or whatever it might be.
I know personally, like I feel about a situation is how I look at it and how I deal with it. If I get all worked up about it, then I'm going to be all worked up and stirred up. And if I can just chill out about it and kind of just realize it is what it is, then I handle it a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to, just be a smoother process. It's like it's that whole acceptance of the situation. But if I try to fight it, then it's just a mess in my head. And
Mm-hmm.
I get nowhere.
Mm-hmm. It really just makes the mess in the head worse. And I think, for me anyways, the perception is like, I'm getting somewhere when I'm doing it. That's the reason why I'm doing it, because I think I'm going to get somewhere doing it. And usually where it gets me, pretty much every time, is I finally conclude that I can't get anywhere that way. I make it worse in the process, but that's usually where it gets me, is, I conclude that I can't get anywhere doing it that way. But yet, we easily do that again and again. What about other people? Any other experiences? Really, it was all about emotions for me this week. I mean, the shape of the moment, including the physical, emotional, and mental levels, takes many shapes for all of us, for each of us. It has taken so many different shapes throughout the last time we met together last week. And some of them we preferred to be in way more than others. I know Sunshine was telling me there was one day in particular that was a little tumultuous, but the other days were good. And so there was one day of her week that was, an opportunity to really build a different relationship. But even those most challenging experiences, though, sometimes that's almost impossible to do. And so until we start at the smaller ones first. And I know for myself, there was days this week that was tumultuous, that was challenging. And but I did notice the shift. I did notice a difference in the way I was handling it. It's almost like I was just recognizing, oh yeah, I am here. I am here. That's really what the recognition was. Oh, I am here. And in those moments, the shape of the moment was a particular shape that I wasn't normally comfortable with being present with, which was whatever emotion it was at the time, frustration or upsetness or whatever. And so it was interesting to watch how quickly the emotion would dissipate, and I would really get to the place of contentment or happiness or comfort or whatever much more quickly. I would get to the same place anyways, and even much more quickly, just by recognizing in that moment, oh, okay, this is what it is. This is what I am. This is the shape. And it's as simple as that. that's the act of building the new relationship, if we can just remember to do it in the moment.
I'm starting to see things in the moment enough that I recognize in the moment, and occasionally I'm able to act in the moment. But I'm recognizing it and seeing it a lot more, and it feels really good.
You've been saying that, yeah, that's awesome. Do you have like one instance that you can describe in particular that stands out this week that you did that? Remembered in the moment?
Not at the moment.
Yeah.
I kind of cleared my mind and just centered myself before class and
Perfect.
kind of let go. So I'm sure it'll come back up in class though.
Cool. Wonderful. Awesome. Okay, guys, before we move on to the next lesson, does anyone else have any further comments about any of their experiences with the lesson, or even challenges with settling into your life? Essentially, what it is, instead of making our lives into a problem. Goodness gracious, we have to live these things. We have to be in these bodies and live these lives. Let's not make it into more of a challenge than it needs to be by thinking it always needs to be something different. And so, did anyone else have any experiences with that at all that they'd like to share this week? Stan, you usually have something good. Do you have did you have anything from this week that really stands out to you that relates to this at all?
Not in particular. I try to keep myself in the position of the inner higher level observer, and that really helps stabilize anything that's going on that I'm experiencing on the material level. And the past week there haven't been any real peaks or stressful events,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm always grateful for. It's just staying in the observer position and telling myself this too will pass. It helps.
Well, that's exactly it. What we're describing in this lesson, seeing those three parts of reality, three parts of the present moment, the physical, emotional, and mental, as one thing, immediately pops you out of it as to the one viewing that thing, which is the observer position that you're talking about. And really the control that gives you over your life, that just isn't there when we're not practicing something that pops us out in that way, that gives us a different perspective.
Well, totally, because in this culture we're brought up with the concept that we are our physical body, and those of us here know that ain't the case. And so it's difficult, and it takes willpower to break ourselves of that cultural habituation of that erroneous viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we do it, the better we get at it. And so, and it really helps to do it in non-stressful times. Do it as much as you can.
Yeah.
Remind yourself that I am a spiritual being here for a period of learning, and all this is just school. And 10 years from now, 30 years from now, none of this will matter except the experiences, the learning experiences that we have derived from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we pretty innocently have concluded that, like you're saying, that we are our bodies, or whatever you want to whatever, or we are our thoughts, or whatever we think we are. We pretty innocently concluded that just by looking out of our eyes. This is the immediate assumption that's easy to make, and so this, and it's also true. It's not like it's false. There is a way in which this is what you could call who we are, and also there's more, and that's what we're learning to become more aware of by these different ideas.
Well, our culture does nothing to remind us that we are more than our physical bodies, and most religions don't either. They talk about the soul,
Sure.
but as one devout Christian told me years ago, he said the soul is a part of you of which you're not aware, and when you die, your consciousness dies, and that soul that you're not even aware of, that's what goes to heaven if you've been good. And of course, we know that's false. But I think one of the big spiritual shortcomings of our society is that it doesn't teach us that we are souls here for a period of learning. But the teachers can't teach that which they don't know, that they don't realize. And too many, large percentage of people in our culture don't realize that they are spiritual energy beings here for a period of learning in a temporary body.
And I think people realize it too right when it's needed. So it's not necessarily a bad or a wrong thing. And I'm not thinking that you're saying that it is, that whoever, whether it be people or teachers or preachers or whatever, have recognized a deeper, a much deeper aspect to them, because it really takes, it's like at the end of the movie, you don't know what the end is until you've got there. It really takes experience. It really is the journey to even build up the necessary pressure to look for something different. Because if there's no motivation or pressure to discover the deeper thing, then it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So
I think you're right. I think most people get to a threshold point in their lives where that realization is thrust upon them.
Right.
Because
of
life circumstances.
Yeah.
But if it's some place, whether it's school or the religious institutions or whatever, if there was some place in our lives that just said, hey, here's what the evidence points to, where we're at least aware of that concept of being an energy being in a biophysical body temporarily for a period of learning, we may not believe it, we may not pay any more than passing attention to it. But the seed of the concept is planted, and I think that the vast majority of people, when they hit one of the speed bumps in life's road, that would come back to them, and it would help them have a much earlier episode of learning and self-awareness than what most people encounter.
Yeah. And the other thing that comes to my mind when talking about these things is to remember that the words that we use are just pointers to the actual experience that we're talking about. And so some people might not ever use the words observer position to describe their own similar experience that they might be awake to, and really be quite far along and advanced in their connection to that. And so,
well, it's truly the observer position or the observer point of consciousness. That concept I did not become aware of until we started talking about it at the school. But
right, good point.
Aware of it. Huh?
Yeah, that was a good point, because you became aware of it before, but you became aware of the concept after.
I became aware of the words to tag on to it.
Exactly.
But I was definitely aware of the concept, aware of the
experience,
of the phenomena, the experience, the reality of it, and that was a life lesson that was I found myself in the midst of, and it was crystal clear what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like the first time I had an out of body experience. I'd never heard of it,
Mm-hmm.
but when it happened, it was crystal clear what was happening because it was that distinct and vivid. There was no way that was my imagination.
I think that a lot of to get to that place has to do with surrender and letting go, and sometimes we're forced into that. And also, we can do it through progressive realization, and that really is what the structure of this course has set out to do as well. It's like through several different formats that we used of seeing how everything's actually working together to support you, or to seeing how the structure and growth are both one and the same, and so they're both crucial for what were we saying with that? It's like the growth is the rock is the structure in which even creates the possibility of moving forward. People get hung up on like the idea of change, but don't forget that if it wasn't for that of which exactly you are, there wouldn't even be the possibility for change. And so these various things like that helps us to surrender the mind and really so we can even begin to surrender the mind and have the realization so we can even begin to get back into that more observer position as you affectionately call it.
Well, I think you touched on something very important. It's the concept of the stability of the rock, which we all have within us based upon our life experiences so far. That gives us the foundation from which to apply new learning. It gives us the stability we need, because the subjects that we're talking about are not simple subjects. and even though those of us here, I'm sure I can say this about everyone else in this class, this is not our only source in life of this subject matter. But in our culture, being considered non-mainstream and even to the point of woo-woo, we don't get as much experience with this or much teachings and acceptance of the metaphysical, et cetera, as do other cultures. So most of us need all the help we can get with being able to create a stable rock for the moss to grow upon.
Yeah. I think life also offers it to everyone in a pretty even kind of way. We just happen to use the language of metaphysics in order to talk about the same one thing, the same one conclusion, which is just evolving, essentially, that everyone's coming to. I mean, I appreciate too, Stan, the language that the metaphysical or spiritual language that we use, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, everyone's got the same opportunity to evolve. They're just conceptualizing how the evolution is conceptualizing differently how the evolution that's taking place is happening.
Exactly. And as we also know, oftentimes spoken language is inadequate to properly convey the concepts and the experiences.
It definitely makes it challenging sometimes. Definitely.
One of these days, when we're all adept telepaths, we won't have that.
I know, right? Cool. Hey, Lynn, did you have any experiences this week you could share?
Just see how this relates. I had a trigger go off. So I'm trying to relate it to our language. Speaking of language, but just I was able to talk about it. It was I had an attraction to this particular individual.
Mm-hmm.
I had an attraction to before, who's not available, who's in another relationship.
Cool.
And I saw a post good old Facebook that just triggered me, and it actually, because this person is married and happily, I guess,
Yeah.
or maybe not, it just looks like it. But, so I think it triggered a lot of my just some insecurity. I guess looking at something to jump off from, just because I've been single for a little bit now, and just open the relationship, thinking about dating again, and it's a whole nother class on that.
Totally.
I guess, yeah. I guess what it just shows me, and I talked to some few friends about it, so I was able to get back to my center and just my perspective. My perspective it was like an old wound there that triggered me getting upset and just put me somewhere else. So I'm better now. I'm good.
That really is the building the new relationship.
Be an awareness of the what you're cutting out.
I'm sorry, I kind of interrupted. I was just excited because I saw it really as that whole process that you went through was the process of like after the emotion came up, what you did with your friends and whatever else you did really is the process of building a new relationship with that difficulty that arose, and there's an evolution that happens from that.
Yeah.
It's a similar kind of thing.
I think getting in touch with, and it just, so it's sort of embracing the experience too.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't really want to feel the feelings, because it brings up, I'm not good enough. This old tape, he just. I'm like, wait, this one person, it's like the angel and the devil going going at me. So, but so I guess that is part of the whole process. I was thinking about that as we were talking. I'm like, oh, do I want to talk about that? But
that's a good example too, because there's no way that couldn't happen. Like, due to the structure of that of which exactly who and what you are and all the meaning, all the thoughts that you have, the limitations you have, if you want to call it that, or the ego that you have, if you want to call it that, or the concepts you have of relationships, or the concepts you have of being single, whatever point in which you look at it, that is the point and structure, the very point of that of which you're operating with. And so due to that, there's going to be the emotional experience, and so that's the level at which you're healing yourself. That's the level at which you're moving forward from, or from the analogy of the rock and the moss, that's the level of which you are. And so you get the wonderful opportunity to really evolve that understanding of, it has nothing to do about my worth or value. And so that's the growth point. And really, you're doing it more for even just you. By you coming to these understandings, you're helping everyone else come to these understandings as well. You'll be able to share that and live that in a way that other people need.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's wonderful. Good example.
I appreciate that. I like that.
Thank you, Lynn.
Okay.
Does anyone else have anything to add from this week?
Welcome.
Kara, KT, Carolyn, or anyone really?
I learned that I need to start being more flexible and lenient with myself on finding my structure or my rock, or allowing it to form naturally instead of trying to force structures that maybe work for other people. I had some stress this past week because I had kind of overpromised on how much art I was going to have finished in time for Valentine's Day. For those of you that don't know, I'm just recently putting myself out there more and trying to market myself better and grow my business.
Awesome.
And I should be holding myself in a very forgiving place because I'm learning and it's all new. But when I say I overpromised, I mean that I thought I was gonna have this many pieces in time for Valentine's Day for people that wanted them, and then my art just takes me longer than I realized. So I was feeling some guilt over not having accomplished everything that I thought I would in that amount of time. And I had to take a step out of myself and kind of be that comforting parent person for myself and say, like, hey, that's all right, you're learning, but it just takes you longer to do things, and it's going to work differently, and you're just going to have to learn along the way. But
Right.
it's really hard to remove myself from that moment of just, you're letting people down, like, you messed it up, and, you know, all those terrible things. But
It's so hard to come to terms with your structure being this what's considered as disappointment. Because in that moment your structure is, oh, I am not going to have these things done in time, and that is literally the structure of your life in that moment. And yeah, it's hard to just sometimes just allow yourself to be the structure of your life, the shape of your life, because there's that other part of you that has these really idealistic should-bes and ways that you wanted things to be, that is like, that won't let you be the worst thing in the world to surrender to the idea of this structure that your life is as actually being your life. And so what we find ourselves in is in resistance to ourselves. And that's really what we're learning to build a new relationship with, is whether you want to call it the structure of our life, or if it turns into resistance to ourselves, then we're building a new relationship with resistance at that point. And that's part of building the new relationship with the structure, that in your case is not having everything done in time, not having all your artwork done. That's literally the shape of your life.
I think I often make those high idealistic commitments when I'm feeling my best, and I don't take into account that maybe between now and when I need things to be finished, I won't be feeling my best,
Right.
and I should give myself some space to just work more organically.
Yeah, right. That's a good learning right there. That's so cool. I love that you said that, KT, because I do these lessons. As some of you guys know, I write these lessons every single week. They're kind of an amalgamation of everything that we've talked about from the previous week, and moving all those things forward into what would be most helpful for our next topic, given what everyone included in the conversation last time, really. And so that process isn't like I whip it out just like that. That's a fairly short amount of time within a week, including all the other things in my life I have to do. And so sometimes I don't allow myself enough space to actually be able to get that done, because I think I can just, when I'm at my best, like you're saying, I'm like, oh, I can do that in X amount of time. And comes find out that isn't possible, because in that time slot I had planned, I'm not feeling my best, like you're saying right then. So yeah, allowing enough time to include the habits that you know that you are, the likelihood, the amount of time that you will spend in the more uninspired moments of your life. That's a good example. It's a good thing to be aware of. That's part of your structure too. Part of my structure is that there are going to be some downtime, which I'm not going to want to spend writing some high-minded spiritual stuff, because that's not going to mesh. That's not going to be what you want. And so you got to account for those things. Good example, KT. All right, anyone else have anything to share before we move on to the next lesson? Kara or Carolyn or anyone else?
Well, this week has definitely been trying not to identify with the turmoil and whatnot.
Yeah, you've had a lot of stuff going on in your life this past little while.
Just kind of, yeah, try to move with what's going on, but not not get too stuck in it.
Mm-hmm. What would you say the energy or the emotion is in what you're moving through right now?
Not really sure on that.
I could see it being something like,
Just
yeah, go ahead.
a lot of mostly exhaustion right now because, like I said, haven't been sleeping well all week. But I feel like at this point, the best I can do is just be aware of that and work with it as best I can.
Mm-hmm. Does the overwhelm part, because I totally get it, and I think this is what it would be for me, does the overwhelm part come from just being emotionally taxed?
Probably. And right now it's like every time I get a text, I kind of freak out a little bit.
Mm-hmm, totally. Yeah, Carolyn has someone close to her who's ill, and so she's worried, of course, what the result of that might be. If you don't mind me saying that little tidbit there. Well, goodness. So yeah, those are some of the most challenging present moment shapes to build a new relationship with. It definitely is a powerful point to. So it's like, so yeah, it's a difficult shape to build a relationship with. However, what it is a powerful point to reshape the way that we see ourselves in the world into one of perhaps many experiences, or even the very experience that surrenders our mind in more of a way that it hasn't been before, by perhaps realizing the fragileness of life. Or it could be one of many experiences, or even the last experience of the pressure, like you're saying, overwhelmness, the pressure buildup needed in order to propel us to the next highest stage of our own personal evolution. And so it's difficult because in the position where you're at now, it's important to honor it as and even like recognize that you should be there. Honor it, and what's the word? It's recognize that you should be there, and that's okay, and that's good. And also the cool thing about it is it likely will be very much a part of the propulsion that brings you to where you're really wanting to be, or where you will be in the future. But that's not even important now. What's important now is the appreciating and honoring the space that you're in, which is really the kind of building the new relationship that we've been talking about with the moment. So I know you know that everything always gets better. That's essentially what it's saying in a nutshell. And also, I think you're doing exactly what you need to be doing, caring for yourself and validating. That was the word I was looking for earlier, validating your experience. Even though it will go somewhere else, be propulsion that brings you away from the pressure into the next greatest, validating yourself right now is the loving yourself that really is what's needed. And it's so universal too, because it goes true for Carolyn there, but it also goes true for all of us in any situation that we're feeling anything. When we're feeling an intense thing, what's needed is not to try to fix it or even to see how it will be better in the future, but to validate that experience for yourself. Sometimes we have people in our lives who will validate our experience for us to help us feel loved and heard and understood, but we're also learning to be able to do that for ourselves. So that's an important step in the evolution, yeah, in the evolution of that's an important step in just the process of healing. Cool. Thanks for sharing that, Carolyn.
As we learn to be able to integrate events like that in our lives and heal them within ourselves, we get to the point of being able to do that on our own without having to rely or needing to rely on other people.
Mm-hmm.
It gives us a point of evolution and enlightenment and stability to where then we are better able to help others.
Totally, good point. Another strong purpose of why this is happening to you is I know you're a very other-oriented person, so this will be just another amazing capacity that you have to help others with in the future. Okay, guys, it's about halfway through, so let's go ahead and take these thoughts that we've had from Lesson 8 and see them transfer over to our new lesson, which is Lesson 9. Lesson 9 is called, so like I said, we're starting to conclude everything. So, as you guys know, the title of this class is Awakening, the Master Key to All Problems. And the title of this lesson is called The Master Key to All Problems, Oneness. So we're going to go into discovering what way we are one and what barriers come in to actually not only seeing that, but experiencing oneness for ourselves. Oneness in our own direct experience of life instead of just the idea of the concept of oneness. And so this lesson will help to take away some of those barriers to have that more direct experience, and not only for the experience, but the healing that it'll provide within all of our relationships in our life, for one. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. Give me a thumbs up if you guys can see it. Great. Okay, let's go. Here we go. All right. Lesson 9. Awakening, the master key to all problems, oneness. So as we start all these out, we do a little paragraph rebriefing of the last lesson before we move into the new one. So in our last lesson, we included everything in existence as part of the rock. We included all levels of experience, physical, emotional, and mental, into one ever-changing shape that is the present moment. The present moment is always changing. We like some present moment shapes better than others. But when we make our well-being dependent on these shapes, these select shapes, we give our power away to that moment, now slipping away into the past or a future moment not yet arrived. Now, though, we are practicing to build a new relationship with whatever shape the moment takes, a new relationship that stabilizes us like a rock. We are starting to build a stable relationship, a loving attitude toward each shape our present moment takes. As we will find in this lesson, and I put everything in this paragraph in bold because of how important it is. You could even just reread this paragraph throughout the week and it would be profoundly helpful. I'm going to read on. This new relationship we are building is essentially with existence itself. And let's clarify. Existence itself includes everything perceivable in every present moment. When we can include not only ourselves as existence, but recognize this existence as ourself, then we can start to see what we hold against others is actually us holding it against ourselves. We can start to see unpleasant thoughts that may arise in a moment, not as the truth of what is happening situationally, but the truth of the attitudes held against existence ourselves. So this is a powerful statement, and the reason why it's worded in the way that it's worded here, particularly in this sentence here, when we can include not only ourselves as existence, because we usually have a concept functioning and operating of us as separate than existence. And so what we're attempting to do is include ourselves as existence, in existence. And then after you've included yourself, this is such an interesting process, then to recognize that this existence that you've just included yourself in as yourself. And so then it wouldn't even make sense to interact with someone else in a mean or hurtful way, because you have included yourself as existence, then seen yourself as existence. And so to hurt or be mean to anyone else would literally be to hurt or be mean to yourself. So like this paragraph, this sentence says, we can start to see unhappy thoughts that may arise in a moment, not as the truth of what's happening situationally, because that's what we take our thoughts as, the truth of what's happening situationally. And there's a place for that, but that's not what we're talking about here. Instead of seeing our thoughts as the truth of what's happening situationally, see our thoughts as the attitudes held against existence, ourself. Hello, you. Meet yourself, existence. Being introduced to yourself in this way is a sobering experience. Before sobering, we unconsciously and innocently are seeking for our next emotional fix. Our drug of choice are the feelings that our long-standing mental patterns have always produced. Mental patterns such as proving others wrong, I'm not good enough, being better than, being right, being a part of something others are not, comparative thinking, hero or victim mentality, etc., all requiring a you and a someone else or something else, meaning two or more really, a duality. Whatever pattern it might have been, it created an idea of who you are. Whatever, any of these patterns, not enough, being right, whatever it was, it created an idea of who you are and a feeling that goes along with it. And all this together is the perfect parameters to produce a believable experience of who you are as something separate from existence. So if it wasn't for the ideas in our head and then the feelings that the ideas produce, there wouldn't be that structure or parameter in which there would be a believable experience of a something that's separate from everything else that is seen. A sense of self. Those things, the things that we get the fix from, the mental patterns, our drug of choice, whether it's proving others wrong or not being good enough, whatever it is a concept of a them, and then in relation to a concept of a you. And that's the duality. That's the seeing ourself as separate from the world. And the concept of duality, part of it being the long-standing mental patterns of not good enough or maybe hero or victim mentality, whatever it might be, creates those emotions that is the perfect parameters for there to be a believable experience of a separate you from everything else. Let's move on to the next section here. Separate concepts is what I call this next section. what I just described earlier, this is what we consider normal life, and is similar to being in a kind of cage, a cage of our own concepts. Thus, there is an urgent need to take action, to fix or correct what is seen as wrong, unfair, unjust, bad, etc. in our life. It's important now. We have to get out of this cage now. What does your cage look like? What do you see in the world and other people in it? We all have stories in our minds about what we see in other people. These stories are interpretations of their words and actions fueled by our own attitudes. I'm going to read that again. These stories in our minds are our interpretations of their words and actions fueled by our own attitudes. We believe these dualistic stories that arise in our minds, such as the truth of what is happening, when we know our life as many separate things within the whole. So whenever we believe ourselves to be a part within the whole, or a separate thing within the whole, then we believe the truth of these dualistic stories. But when we experiment with seeing these stories not as the truth of what is happening situationally, but the truth of the attitudes within us, then we can start to see other people not as parts within the whole, but as the same one thing that is you, existence. So once again, when we experiment with seeing the stories, that whenever we look at our eyes and have experiences in our life, there are stories in our heads. And whenever we experiment with seeing these stories not as truth of what's happening situationally, like we do, but instead the truth of the attitudes within us. Then when we experiment in that way, then we can start to see other people not as parts within the whole, but as the same one thing that is you, which is existence. And this is when oneness, you can start to get glimpses of oneness and then make different choices based on that. Let's read farther. Even though there is truth about us being parts within the whole, some truths are only helpful until they're not. Seeing each thing as a part activates the separate concept we have about it. So when we look at our eyes and we see the parts, which we naturally do, and we're not practicing to see it from oneness, then that immediately activates the separate concepts about each thing that we see. So I'm going to read that again. Seeing each thing as a part activates the separate concept we have about it. Each dualistic concept we have about a part of the whole can serve us in moving and living in the world. So it's important. It's important to be able to have that separate concept about each part within the whole. That's part of how we move in the world. It's helpful to know the parts, their general function, purpose, and value, and how that relates to our concepts of all the other parts within the whole. Critical. We have to know that to be able to move into the world, move in the world. However, those concepts, ideas, words, or thoughts are not the things themselves. Words and thoughts are not the same thing as another person. Our words and thoughts are what we have an unpleasant experience with, not the other person. So we don't have an unpleasant experience with the other person. We have an unpleasant experience with our thoughts about the other person. When we recognize this subtle distinction, we have pinpointed our own belief in separateness, dualistic thinking itself. I've got wondering if anyone has any thoughts or questions, even up to this point right here, because I've got an image that may help to make this clear that I could share with everyone. Let me end this sharing, and I'll share another screen. And while I do that, if anyone has any thoughts or questions about what we've talked about so far, please share it with us. Please say it. because this is a powerful tool to heal our discrepancies and our challenges we have with the people in our lives, to understand the way in which it's futile to act against anyone, because they are the same thing that we are. And in this way, we make the different choices that create the better feelings that we want to begin with by trying to get someone to be different or do different. If they would just do this, then we would all be better. We'd all feel better. When you would have control over creating the better feeling just by realizing that it is you that you're attacking. It is you that you're having this other person that you're having these bad thoughts about is also the same one thing that you are, which is existence. So I'm going to draw this. Can you all see my new screen that I put on here? Yeah, cool. So I'm going to draw a image that helps to kind of make a connection to what we're talking about. This right here is we'll say a person. This is a person. That's a person. And that's a person. We'll even say that this person is you. And then from each one of these persons, and really each one of these X's doesn't even have to represent a person. It could represent anything in your life, anything in existence. It could be this desk, it could be a car, it could be whatever. The point is each one of these X's has a concept hooked to it. So this is a C. This is a squiggle line indicating that there's a concept hooked to this physical thing. And then there's a concept hooked to this physical thing. Maybe it's a person or a car, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And then there's a concept hooked to this physical thing and a concept hooked to this physical thing. And the point is that this is dualistic thinking itself. This is the activation of dualistic thinking, is having a concept for each and everything. Now, this is the way we move in the world, so we can't not have a concept of each and everything. However, when we come up against challenging and difficult situations in our life, a way to heal that, a way to make a change in that is to recognize, is to practice rather, seeing not from the perspective of the concept about the challenging person or thing, but from the perspective of how all of these things, you and the other, is the same one thing, which is existence. And then acting from that point, which then having disgruntled thoughts about wouldn't make any sense. It would be insane for you to attack yourself, essentially. And so this is the first image. And so then what it can move to, I'm going to draw a secondary kind of an image below here, which is also these X's will indicate the same thing, but we're practicing not so much having, in our challenging situations in particular, where we're trying to gain greater perspective and greater harmony within our lives, to practice not seeing these separate concepts. Each one of these is a separate concept that creates that experience of there being separate things in the world. Literally, the concept itself is what creates the separate experience. It is what creates the experience and the believable experience of there being separate things in the world. It's so powerful. Literally, our concepts of all the individual parts in the world is what creates the experience of there being separate things in the world. And so whenever we're practicing healing or evolving from our challenging or difficult situations, we're practicing seeing all the parts as one. And so this circle around all of it is the indication of all of the things in existence is of one. And for you to be a rogue thinking disgruntled thoughts about other parts of existence, a rogue part of existence, then you can see yourself in a more clear light that how unhelpful that is for yourself. And so this is oneness. Which whenever you do this, you really can start to make different choices when you see existence as you. You will start to make different choices. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen on that one. Let me know if anyone has any immediate thoughts that arise with this. I'm going to share while I'm working on sharing my screen back to the original lesson. Let me know if anyone has any thoughts. Okay. The last section. Thumbs up, can see it. The last section is thoughts and things synonymous. So the first section we really went into, I'm scrolling back up to the first section, really went into, and that was this paragraph, the way in which everything is of the same one thing, which is existence. And then a helpful way to begin to experience that oneness of everything in existence being the same one thing is to recognize all the little concepts we have of each part within existence as literally what creates the experience of there being separateness. And so that was the last section we went over. And then the other contributing factor that limits us in experiencing a deeper reality of connectedness and oneness is how we correlate thoughts and the things of the world as being the same one thing, as being synonymous, as being the same thing. So thoughts and the things of the world, the people in the world, our thoughts we have about the things in the world are not the same as the things in the world. They're just our thoughts about the things in the world. And so this can help us again. So I'll read on. When we look out of our eyes and see separate things, dual, this sets into motion the formulating of separate concepts, dualistic thinking for each thing, which is what we just went over. Not only do we formulate separate concepts for each thing when we look out of our eyes, but we unconsciously make the concept and the thing itself synonymous. When we move through the world in this way, our experience is akin to a landmine planted in a high-traffic area, a bomb that could detonate at any moment. The more our thoughts are synonymous, the same thing, with the thing, a person, whatever, the thought represents, the more explosive or reactive we are in our lives. Here, when a thought arises, particularly pronounced when it's an unpleasant thought, that's when we experience it the most as a problem, we believe that thought to be the same thing as we believe that thought to be the same as the thing the thought represents. Okay, is that clear? So I'm going to read that again. When a thought arises, it's particularly noticed and pronounced when it's an unpleasant thought. When a thought arises, we believe that thought to be the same as the thing that the thought represents. I.e., it might be a person. When you have a thought arise in your mind about a person, we believe what that thought says, what that thought represents, as the same thing as that person. But we can I'm moving on. We can practice to change this. And so here's an interesting little practice. Instead of saying, this is a coffee cup. This is a coffee cup. We could practice saying, this is called coffee cup. A subtle distinction, but a powerful one to make. So let's read that again. This is a coffee cup. We could practice saying, instead of this is a coffee cup, which is immediately correlating the word coffee cup with the object that we call a coffee cup. When we correlate the words or the concept with the actual thing, when we practice doing that all the time, and we do that in our speech. You could say, quote, practice. We do that all the time. We correlate, we make them the same. No distinction between the concept and the thing. And this is not a problem most of the time, but it is a problem whenever someone's actions pulls up thoughts in your mind that mean something bad. And that means the thought and when the thought in that case and the thing is the same thing, then you experience much trepidation from that thought. And so your experience is difficult. And so practicing to, instead of relating the thought and the thing as being the same, instead of this is a coffee cup, we can practice saying this is called coffee cup. Or whenever your thoughts have a thing that comes up, labeling something that had happened, you can even say to yourself, oh, my mind is calling this such and such. So just practice making a distinction between the thing and your thoughts about the thing. Like I read a second ago, subtle distinction, but a powerful one to make. I'm going to read on. When we practice to create these distinctions, we immediately start to heal the core error at the heart of our misunderstandings with each other. We're separating our thoughts about things and the things themselves. The core error from the assumption we make just by innocently looking out of our eyes, which is that we are separate. That's the core error we make. And it's an easy assumption to make. And we make it just by innocently looking out of our eyes. That we are separate and that our thoughts and concepts are synonymous with what is seen. So to conclude this, the master key to all problems is to include yourself as existence, as we talked about in the first section. Then to recognize this existence as yourself. Here, we are building a new relationship with existence itself, just by seeing it as futile to fight against due to it being you. Can you guys see how this would change your relationships? If when a thought that came up in a challenging situation with someone was seen not as the reality of the thing that they didn't like that you did, but as the reality of the attitudes that you hold against yourself. And we may even get that conceptually, but to really be able to see that and experience that for ourselves, it is helpful to practice seeing yourself so here's existence. It's helpful to practice seeing yourself as existence, and then you at that point being existence. Because what existence is in this example is the other person who you're having difficulty with. And so if existence and the other person you're having difficulty with is you and your existence, then it wouldn't make any sense to have ill thoughts about anyone else. So when we practice seeing in this way, then like the lesson said, we are building a new relationship with existence, because then we can see it's futile to fight against anything because it's you. We can see it's futile to fight against it due to it being you. What do you guys think of that?
I felt like while you were reading through that whole lesson, I just had all these little brain explosions going
I know, right? I bet.
about how liberating putting this lesson into practice is going to be. So, thank you.
Totally.
I was having memory fragments of a friend of mine's discussion on what is a table.
Exactly.
It's like we get so fixated on what are basically snapshots of existence, but things change so slowly sometimes that it seems like it's constant.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yeah, it's so weird. So in like a challenging situation, it really is that those separate concepts that we have for each thing. And there's so many that play all at once. So we have a separate concept for ourselves, we have a separate concept for the other person and anyone else in the room, and also in the periphery of all the other objects in the room as well. And if this particular interaction with this person in this room is creating any kind of difficulty or emotion, then now we're going to have concepts on top of those concepts of our own judgments or ideas that we have about the emotions or the difficulty itself. And so there are so many complex layers due to all of these concepts that we have about all the individual parts. And so we can really start to get out of our conditioning and patterns and make a different choice to really better the quality of our lives when we can practice seeing everything in existence and yourself as one. And then consider yourself that existence. And at that point, it's really easy to make different choices to better that challenging situation. That's a heck of a way to get out of your ego or limitations or conditioning. That's a way to make different choices. When you can take a moment to step back and realize, and not even realize maybe isn't the best word, but just take a moment to go through that. Okay, so here's everything in existence, which is the person I'm having a problem with and everything else that I see. And also, don't forget to include myself in existence. So now there's all that. And now let me consider myself, that of which I included everything in, and then make a decision from that space. Because from that space, it wouldn't make any sense to have those ill thoughts towards another part of yourself. It would be like fighting yourself. It would be like looking in the mirror and punching the mirror. It just wouldn't produce anything. It just wouldn't do anything. And those arguments perhaps can be healed in a much in a different way than we were going about before by approaching it in this way. So it's a totally different movement. Instead of going in to fix the different parts, and so we'd be fixing all the parts. This is the normal mode. Here's all the parts in a situation. Say there's these 4 parts, and here we are, and we have a different concept. So there's a C above each one of these parts, and so we would use the concept of we are and the concept we have of each one of these things. And now, for a moment, let's just take all those concepts away and realize that if there's a person over here looking at these concepts, they're going to have different concepts, in some cases wildly different, in some cases similar, than you do. So everyone's going to have different concepts of the same actual things. And so once again, let's say, starting the scenario over, we're looking at the concepts. We're looking at the things, and then we have a concept of each one of these things right above it, we'll say. And if we want to fix this challenging, difficult situation, that's our mentality, is we want to fix it. And so we think of its form and function and its value in relation to really what we want. And then try to make that happen, try to make what we want happen. Well, right off the bat, you're already deadlocked. You're already in a point of resistance. You're already in what you can consider a fight, meaning just like resistance or pressure. And so what we're practicing to do instead, because we've done that a whole bunch of times, we've done that in our life a whole bunch, particularly in those situations that you're wanting to make a different choice in, then we could practice, here's all the different parts, we could practice looking a little deeper. Oh, all those parts are actually connected to the same one thing, my hand. And so now it seems, oh, and actually this hand is connected to me, this arm. And so now it seems ridiculous for me to get mad at this finger. Which is really the truth of things. And at that point, we make a different decision. Now it starts to change the concept we have of this finger that was the bad, troublesome thing, the bad person in our life. Now it starts to change that concept, and we start to make different choices of how we will handle this situation in order to move forward.
Kind of brings Mitch Hedberg's joke into a different light.
What is that? I don't know who that is or what that is.
He was a comedian, passed away in 2005, I think. But he said something about that, you know, if I accidentally cut my arm off, is my arm Mitch? And then if I reattach it, is it Mitch altogether?
Uh-huh. That's funny. Does anyone else have any thoughts to add or questions or inspirations to add to what we're talking about here? Any thoughts at all?
This was very helpful for me.
Cool, good.
I have the concepts, like you're saying, I have the conceptual, but just a reminder to, like, oh yeah, that person I'm that's aggravating, that's really affecting me. Yeah.
And I tried to break this down in a more like parts kind of way, to where it's like we have the concept of the other person, so there's a C above it, and we can start to see that concept that we have of the other person is literally the act of creating an experience of duality. It literally the experience of creating a separateness. And so we're operating from separateness, which is really operating from pain. And so we're practicing instead of working from our existing concepts, which are the concepts of separateness, which is the concept of pain, we're practicing instead to see in which way that thing that we had the concept about before is actually existence, which we are a part of, and ourself is actually existence. And then at that point, making new decisions from that perspective. And so what would you do from that perspective? That's really the question. And then just have experiences of seeing how that moves in your life, and what ways that's something that you would that would work for you in your life. See what happens. Okay, guys. So let me show you. I'll share my screen one very last time, and I'll show you guys the homework for this class period. Okay. I practice this week. I think you guys can see it probably. Yeah. So read the lesson, as always. And this time I did something a little bit different, as you can see here. On lesson 9, I put the key points to make this as simple and concise and usable, applicable as possible. And so I also broke the lesson down into kind of those 3 sections as well, which roughly and loosely resembles these 3 key points. So the first key point is, we are existence itself. Attitudes we hold against another is against yourself. Goodness gracious. I'll go ahead and put that in bold. Concept we hold for each thing, and this is the second key point. Concept we hold for each thing is dualistic thinking, our belief in separateness itself. Or you could even say pain. We'll go ahead and add pain on there too. And then the third key point is, our concepts about a thing are usually synonymous with the thing. We usually make it synonymous with the thing. And this is an example of that you can quickly and easily bring to mind and practice breaking that bond or breaking those things being synonymous. And the example is, this is a coffee cup versus this is called coffee cup. And so those are the key points to make the application of this as simple as possible. And then the actual practice itself, this will be the actual practice, which is spend some time with each of these 3 key points this week. So just spend some time, maybe one day think about have an experience with one, and another day have an experience with another. And then, like I said, have an experience with each point, and then journal any findings for class discussion next week, which actually is not next week, it'll be in 2 weeks, as we just discerned. So that is the practices or the takeaway or the assignment.
It's interesting the different levels of identification you can have.
Yeah.
Like, this is a coffee cup. This is Betsy, the coffee cup.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of anybody that's named their coffee cups, but I know people that have named their cars.
That is true, yeah. That's a good point. Levels of identification, yeah, like intensity of identification, how intensely identified you are with the object.
Like I read something a while back, somebody had brought home a grizzly bear cub, made the mistake of naming it, and then when it got too big and started tearing stuff up, they couldn't do what needed to be done.
Totally. People on farms will really try hard not to name their animals sometimes for that reason. Cool. Good point. That's funny. All right, guys. Any other thoughts or parting words or questions about the exercises, the practice this week?
I just agree with, I think it was KT that said that, actual practicing of this and stuff can be very liberating, but I also see getting into practicing that, will definitely be work or whatever. I don't even know what the word is for me, but like, I'm really going to have to focus to practice this because I've not practiced, It's not mindset of mine, so I can see the liberation in it for sure. It's just the application and working on it.
You know what I do, Shara? I'm so glad you said that. That's such a wonderful, I'm glad you shared that. So what the points in which I particularly will practice these things is at the point of difficulty. So throughout my week, when there is some kind of little disgruntled thing or difficulty or just some kind of little thing that comes up that's a challenge, at that point, I'll use the point in which to practice. And for 2 reasons. One, it is a great structure, a great framework in which to apply this to. And for 2, that is the very point in which I need to evolve. That is the very point in which I need to grow. And my only other option is to continue to mull over in it, which we usually do. But this is a way to make a different decision. Instead of doing the things we normally do when we get triggered, when we're in a challenge, which is just think about it or whatever we normally do, we instead will grab the lesson and attempt to apply it in that moment. So that's the motivation, is to get out of the pain because it will get you out of the pain.
You definitely have to have the experiences with it to practice and to grow from it, for sure. You can't it's not just going to happen.
Right.
Without experience.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So guys, that's it for this week. It's 7:30. I look forward to hearing what comes up for you guys this week with all this new amazing material. And I won't see you this coming Thursday, but 2 weeks from today. So it gives us plenty of time to have some practice time, like Shara was saying. And I'll send you guys the PDF right away, and also I'll get the recording finished and edited and sent to you guys right away as well, so you guys can rewatch anything if you want or need to. All right, you guys. I love you all a ton. Please stay in contact with me this week, and I'll see you guys next time.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
Yay.